Hey guys, I flew up to North Dakota this week for work and snuck out to do a little fishing while I was up there. As a bonus on the way out to North Dakota, well, actually from Utah, Salt Lake City to Denver, we flew over the high Uintas, which is just an incredible place to backpack and to fish if you ever get a chance to visit. So that's what this is here. I just showed up here at this Van Hook Wildlife Management Area in North Dakota. Never been here before. This is a reservoir on the Missouri River, which I have caught carp on the Missouri River, but long ways away from here over in Montana. Anyway, I'm gonna gear up and go see how we do. I don't know. Hopefully we get into some and get some cool drone footage. Well, every time I get a chance to fish a new area or take on the challenge of fishing a new area, it's kind of exciting and it's kind of intellectually stimulating. Trying to figure out how did these carp feed, or if it's not carp, any species. But I love carp. So there was a lot of carp here, and also buffalo fish, which is a new species for me. I'd never actually caught buffalo fish. Seems like their activity was real similar to the carp. This right here is a bunch of actually buffalo fish. I'm guessing in a giant buffalo fish orgy, but I don't know. That's what it looked like to me. But it was cool to see all the tails and everything, and there was some carp tailing and stuff as well. But what's funny is you'll see in a bunch of these videos, and you'll start to see it right here, it's just the volume of fish. I mean, big schools swimming by. And it was a little difficult to begin with to try to find fish that were actually feeding. Most of those fish that were in that previous shot there, they were all moving pretty fast. They really weren't feeding. I struggled to begin with figuring out, which were the feeding fish and which weren't. And I casted a lot of fish that I normally wouldn't cast to, but I was like, they're just like, where are the feeding fish? And I think really what it was is this area where I fished, I probably spent too much time because there was a ton of fish in here. This was kind of a transition zone. There really weren't that many fish that were actually feeding in this zone. But it's hard to walk away from them. I mean, look at all those fish. That's crazy. They just kept coming. And like I said, I did catch the occasional fish. But once I kind of kept walking along, I found an area where there was a ton of them just sunning. And what I think it was they were coming from a feeding area and coming over to a sunning area. And occasionally they'd stop and they'd feed, but for the most part, they were just cruising through this zone, not feeding much. So right here, you can see it down to the left of me here. I mean, just look at all of these fish, just a crap ton of fish in here. And there was even one or two in here feeding, but I mean, how do you get the ones that are feeding amongst all of those other ones without spooking them? And it was crazy. It was kind of a cool challenge. I didn't actually get one in this group. I shouldn't even have fished. And I really shouldn't even have been fishing for them because, these are just sunning fish. But I'm kind of exploring and kind of prospecting as I'm just looking for where fish might be. But ultimately, there were these zones right on the edges of the weeds, further out, and then along some of the rocky areas where the fish were actually feeding and spending more time in their feeding. So. But again, that's kind of part of the fun when you go and you fish a place like this. I was really struggling to begin with to get the fish to take the drag and drop. And so I actually switched to a technique that a lot of people use where, you let the fish find it and eat it. You cast well in front of them. And that's actually how I caught 3 buffalo fish. All 3 of the buffalo fish I caught that way. And if you've never done this too, I actually use 2 flies in those situations, about 18 inches apart, with the idea being that if you want the carp or the buffalo fish apparently to pattern and come through so that they come within about a foot of that fly. Well, if you give yourself 18 inches between two flies, when you cast out, kind of pull them until they're apart and let them drop into a path you think the fish is going to be moving through. Well, now you've got 6 inches on either side of that 8 inches. So now you're more like 2.5 feet, that if that carp or the buffalo fish comes through, that there's a pretty good chance that they're going to eat. And that's what I did. Like I said, I caught 3 buffalo fish all that way. I did actually catch, I don't remember, 1 or 2 carp that way as well. And then once I found areas where the carp were actually feeding a little bit more, drag and drop worked really well. I was able to go back to my lighter flies using the carp maul, and it worked really well. But yeah, it was just kind of cool to explore a new flat, and this lake, Sacagawea, I think is how you say it. I really think this could be a pretty incredible fishery. There were some big carp out there. I hooked a couple, and I probably lost 4 or 5. 2 of them were big. Like they may have been personal bests for me, that just took off, and then I lost. And I wish I'd have got better drone footage, but it's hard. It's not like my local flats where I have a lot of confidence in how I have to approach the fish. And if I feel like fish is in a good spot and I make a good cast, they're going to eat, and I'm going to have some cool footage. Where here, I was, experimenting. I even ended up doing dry dropper at one point, putting a little hopper pattern on and then dropping a little leech pattern. And I actually ended up catching 2 catfish that way. So there was a lot of experimentation, trying to figure it out. But ultimately, it was fun. It was awesome. I caught quite a few fish, saw some beautiful new country, and made the best out of a work trip. So, yeah, it was a good time. As I've been looking back through the footage, it occurred to me there was something I did want to point out on this. If you notice my shadow, is away from the water here. So the sun, when I'm looking back at these fish, I'm actually, looking into the sun. And this is not ideal. Now, a lot of times we don't have a lot of choice, right? You're going to fish where you can fish. And I couldn't wade out there very far because it was fairly marly, and so it was kind of sticky. It was hard to walk, made a lot of noise. So for the most part, I was trying to stay into the weeds and on the bank as much as possible. But when the sun is like this and the fish is between us and the sun, we kind of glow, and it's the same kind of concept you get with hunting and stuff like that, where the animals can see you better like that, and you can see the animals better if it's the opposite, right? If the animals if you have the sun behind you and you're looking towards the animal, it kind of makes them light up. So anyway, this isn't ideal. If you could get around to the other side, I would have. So like the paddleboard would have been sweet, but didn't have the option here. So on the second day, before I caught my fly, we finished up a little early, and I had about an hour to run out. Now, day 2 was quite a bit more windy, intermittent cloud cover. Actually, we're sustained wind between 17 and 20 miles per hour, with gusts up to 40 and even 50 miles per hour. So that's tough fishing conditions. I don't mind terribly windy conditions, as long as I can still see. Wind provides a whole lot of cover, and you can get a lot closer to the carp in wind. But the issue this day was that it was also, you had those clouds coming through, so you'd have these windows where you could see really well, and then all visibility goes. So during those really short windows, and then you're dealing with 20 mile per hour wind or even gusts higher than that, and you're trying to drop a fly in and maneuver it within 6 inches of the head of a carp, and so it was pretty challenging. I only actually ended up getting one, which you'll see here, and the casting was probably 15 feet. But again, that's one of the advantages in the wind is you can get really close to them, and it can be pretty forgiving, the carp, because there's so much disturbance on the surface. So And you'll also notice that I positioned myself so that the wind was at my back. Anytime you're fishing in the wind, that especially the 20-mile-per-hour wind. I mean, there's no point trying to cast, into that 20-mile-per-hour wind. But if you let it do the work for you, you just kind of flip the fly out there and you just kind of control where it comes down and lands. And got that in close to him. He nailed it, and another pretty good little common carp. So it was a good way to wrap up the trip before I headed back to the airport and headed home. Maybe the best thing about the entire trip was honestly the first evening. I spend a lot of time in nature because my hobbies are all nature related, but I don't know. I haven't seen very many sunsets like this, with the reflection of the water, and it was just honestly magical. And I know that's cheesy, but it was magical. And I just sat and kind of enjoyed the sunset on the water. Not something I get to do very often, and most of the time I'm so focused on the fish, and I want to catch the next fish. And this was just unbelievable. The reds and the purples, just unbelievable. And that was the trip. North Dakota, Lake Sacagawea. Awesome. Actually can't wait to go back. I go out to North Dakota every once in a while, and I'm going to bring my fly rod again next time and do it again.